Lights, camera, action! Hello there, American Girl fans. My name is Kit Kittredge, and I'm here today to share my story with you. So, I'm from the year 1934, the time when America was struggling through the Great Depression. I lived in a big house in Cincinnati, Ohio, with my mother, my dad, and my 16-year-old brother Charlie. My father supported us with his job at his car dealership. I love writing and typing newspapers on my typewriter. I have a nose for news, and I'm always on the lookout for a great story. When a story comes to my head, I type it on my trusty old typewriter. My story begins in the summer of 1932, when me and my best friend Ruthie were listening to my mother's garden club meeting. A friend of hers named Mrs. Howard said that she would no longer be able to be a member of the garden club because she was moving to Chicago with her son Sterling to live with her husband, who was already living there. When one of the ladies asked where they would be living, Mrs. Howard said she wasn't sure. I realized then that the Howards couldn't stay in their house in Cincinnati because they didn't have enough money. And Mr. Howard didn't have a place or a job in Chicago. I was sure of it. But luckily, Mother fixed the whole problem by inviting Mrs. Howard and Sterling to live with me and my family until Mr. Howard sent for them, and she said yes. Upon hearing the news, I went to my room and made a newspaper about the Howards coming. While my dad was at work, I made a newspaper that told him what had happened at home while he was working. That day, my newspaper for him was that the Howards were coming. But to my surprise, my dad didn't seem happy that they were coming, and I didn't know why. Mrs. Howard and Sterling arrived a couple days later, but when I saw Sterling for the first time, I was very surprised at how Sterling looked. He was short, pale, skinny, and had a red, runny nose. He was also very quiet. Whenever me and Ruthie invited Sterling to do something with us, Mrs. Howard always had an excuse for why he couldn't do what we were going to do. After living with us for a week, Sterling caught a bad cold, complete with a fever and bad cough. He had to stay in bed at all times and have his meals brought to him. One day, when I came into Sterling's room, I saw he had a picture of Ernie Lombardi, the catcher for the Cincinnati Reds baseball team, my favorite baseball team. Ernie was also my favorite player on the team. I decided to show Sterling a newspaper article I had of Ernie Lombardi with a photograph of him holding 7 baseballs at once. When I found the article, I ran back to Sterling's room, but little did I know that his mother was behind the door, and the door hit Mrs. Howard. She had a tea tray in her hands, and it fell to the floor. The teacup on the tray shattered into pieces. Mother scolded me for causing the whole thing. I was shocked that she did, since it wasn't like her to do that. I felt like Mother thought I was the one to blame for the whole accident, so I typed a newspaper for Dad, saying what had happened and how it's wrong to blame people for things they didn't do. When I finished, I went outside to wait for Dad to come home from work. Charlie appeared and read my newspaper. Then he told me he wouldn't bother Dad with the newspaper if he was me. When I asked why, he revealed that Dad was closing down his car dealership and going out of business because no one could afford to buy a car anymore. I was horrified. Dad even had to give back our car because he couldn't afford that anymore either. Charlie then told me it would be a struggle to keep our house. Mother and Dad didn't completely own our house because they borrowed money from the bank to buy it, and they had to pay the bank back a little bit every month. It's called a mortgage. If they didn't have enough money for the mortgage, the bank would take the house back. When I asked why Dad told Charlie and Mother the bad news and not me, Charlie said Dad told him because it meant Charlie couldn't go to college anymore, which he had really been looking forward to. I felt so bad for him. I realized that Dad wasn't happy about the Howards coming to stay with us because he had lost his job, and Mother scolded me about the teacup accident because she was thinking of Dad losing his job when she did. When Dad came home, I asked him if we were going to be okay. He said he didn't know. I crumpled up the newspaper I had typed about the teacup accident. It wasn't important anymore. That night, I wrote a list of things on how we could save money. Dad tried to find a new job, but he never had any luck. One day, Mother's mean Uncle Hendrik came to pay a visit. He was never nice to any of us. Uncle Hendrik refused to help Mother keep our home from being taken away. When he asked Mother what she was going to do to keep it, she decided to take in boarders. Both me and Uncle Hendrik were surprised by her brainstorm. Dad wasn't crazy about the idea either. When it was time to decide where the boarders would stay in our house, Charlie agreed to move to the sleeping porch. 2 new boarders would share the guest room. I thought that meant Mrs. Howard and Sterling would be leaving since they were in the guest room, but I was wrong. They would be moving into my bedroom, and I would have to stay in the attic. Oh, I did not like that. After inspecting the attic, I asked Mother how we were going to fix it up, and Mother told me she didn't have time to help me. She suggested I take a look around in the attic and see what I could find. In one of the boxes I looked through, I found my compass necklace. I'm wearing it right now. See? After opening one of the windows, I looked out and saw a leafy tree branch, and suddenly I had a funny, excited feeling inside me. I knew what I wanted to do. After I scrubbed the windows clean and swept the floor, I made some alcoves, using the other things I found in the box with my compass necklace. A newspaper office alcove, a baseball alcove, a reading alcove, and a treehouse alcove. Robin Hood actually gave me the idea to make the treehouse alcove. I longed to have my own treehouse, just like Robin Hood and his merry men. Robin Hood is my favorite book. Mother liked what I did to decorate the attic for myself. When it was time to go back to school, our boarders had moved in. We had a musician named Mr. Peck and 2 young nurses named Miss Hart and Miss Finney. They paid us money every week for their rooms and meals. But more people meant more chores for me. I had to mop, sweep, scrub, polish, do the laundry, help Mother make breakfast and dinner, wash the dishes after breakfast and dinner, weed the garden, and clean the bathtub. I did not like that. Summer turned into fall. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, Mother and I were making breakfast when she told me we would have to take in more boarders. I was horrified. I asked her why, and she told me that even with the money from the boarders and Charlie's earnings at his job loading newspapers onto trucks, we didn't have enough money to cover our expenses. I wished for Dad to get a new job. During breakfast, Mother brought in the morning mail, and she handed a letter to Sterling. The letter was from his father. The letter said he didn't have a permanent address yet, but when he did, he would let him know, and he would send more money when he did. His father had sent him $20. Mrs. Howard gave half of it to my mother, who at first hesitated but then took it. While Mother and I washed the breakfast dishes, Dad looked through the help wanted ads in the newspaper. Dad thought that maybe Chicago would be the best place to find a job. I was shocked, and I told him that he couldn't go. Dad said it was just an idea, and he didn't say he would go. I changed my wish for Dad to get a job to I hoped he got a job in Cincinnati. At school that day, a mean boy in my class named Roger was telling the story about the first Thanksgiving, but he had the story backwards. I raised my hand and corrected him. Roger didn't like that. With Thanksgiving a couple weeks away, Mr. Fisher wanted us all to bring in an item of food to put together a Thanksgiving food basket for a soup kitchen. At lunchtime, Ruthie told me that she had leftover wood from her family's new garage that we could use to build a tree house. I thought that was great. A few days later, while my class and I worked on the backdrop Sterling had drawn for my school's Thanksgiving pageant, Roger teased me and Sterling about living together, saying we were going to get married. Sterling got so mad at Roger that he put glue on turkey feathers and put them face down on a chair. When Roger sat down on the chair, the feathers stuck to his bottom. We all laughed at him. Roger shoves the turkey feathers at me, and I shoves them back at him so hard that Roger lost his balance and fell against a ladder that had a bucket of white paint on it. The paint fell on the backdrop and Roger. Just as Roger lunged at me, Mr. Fisher appeared. Roger blames the whole thing on me, Ruthie, and Sterling. Our punishment was having to redo the backdrop where the white paint had spilled on it during our recess time. We also had to bring the Thanksgiving food basket to the soup kitchen while everyone else watched the Thanksgiving pageant. When we got to the soup kitchen, we were surprised to see how many people were standing in line for their food. We went inside and left the basket in the kitchen. Soup and coffee were being made on the stove, and there were also sandwiches to eat. We brought the canned goods and bread to the area where the food was being served and handed them out to the people walking by. But when I heard a familiar voice thank me for the bread, I looked up and there was Dad. He was at the soup kitchen. It shook me to the core. I ran outside. When Ruthie and Sterling came out, Ruthie told me that Dad was going to talk to me when I got home. When we got home, I said that I hoped Dad would go to Chicago to find a job. Sterling told me I didn't hope he would, and that his father wasn't sending him money. As it turns out, the $20 belonged to Sterling. Before his father left for Chicago, he had given the money to him for an emergency. Then Sterling revealed that his mother hadn't been able to pay any rent since they moved in and had refused to use the $20 for rent. Then one day his mother told him they were going to have to leave my house because his mother was ashamed to stay any longer without paying money. So Sterling thought if his mother believes the money came from his father, his mother would use it for rent. Then Sterling reveals that he actually typed the letter on my typewriter. The letter wasn't from his father at all. Sterling didn't know where his father was and believed he was never coming back. When I went inside my house and went upstairs, I went into Mother and Dad's room, and Dad apologized to me for misleading me. He had been going to the soup kitchen for weeks to eat and get food to bring home to us. Then he told me he was going to Chicago. I begged him not to, but he said he was going to. I went to my room and found a new leak in the attic's roof. Drops of water had fallen on one of my treehouse sketches. But then I remembered Ruthie had leftover wood. I decided we could use the wood to fix up Charlie's sleeping porch and make it nice enough for Mr. Peck to share it with him. Then we could put 2 new borders in Mr. Peck's room. I presented my idea to Mother after dinner, but she said she didn't know if she could handle the extra work 2 new boarders would bring. I suggested she ask Mrs. Howard to help her with the housework, since Sterling had said she wanted to help with it. Mother told me we didn't have money to pay a carpenter, but we both realized at the same moment that Dad could be the carpenter. Mother said the idea would have to be presented to him in just the right way, and I told her to leave that to me. I made a special newspaper that had help wanted ads in it, and Sterling drew the pictures for it. Dad read the newspaper the next morning. He read the construction job description and he said he would take it. I was so happy he wouldn't be going to Chicago anymore. But Dad still didn't find a job outside the house. A few weeks before Christmas, Ruthie and I went to the movies. Ruthie had paid for my ticket, an early Christmas present for me. The movie was about an actress named Dottie Drew, who sang and danced up a staircase that looked like a wedding cake. Before the movie started, they showed a newsreel about my heroine, Amelia Earhart. I love Amelia Earhart. After the movie was over and we were walking to my place, we saw a family's household goods dumped out on the sidewalk. The family had just been evicted. We were both surprised by what we saw. Ruthie and I were making scarves for our dads for Christmas. Miss Hart and Miss Finney were helping us. When we realized we wouldn't be able to finish them that day, we decided to make a newspaper about Amelia Earhart and Dottie Drew instead. Later, I had to explain to Ruthie that my typewriter keys were broken, which would explain why I had to spell the words wrong. My family and I had a Christmas tradition. Every Christmas Eve, we decorated our Christmas tree. We turned the lights on when we were done, and then my mother made waffles for dinner, and we sat around the tree eating them. Ruthie and I had a tradition too. The day after Christmas, we went downtown with our mothers for the whole day. I told Ruthie that I didn't think we would be able to have our tradition that year, since Mother and I didn't have money for anything fancy, but Ruthie suggested we change it up a little bit. I thought it would wreck our tradition to change it. When I pushed the silver arm that moves the paper up and out of my typewriter, I pushed too hard and the arm came off. We went downstairs to get my dad, hoping he could fix it. We heard voices in the living room. It was my parents talking to Ruthie's dad. Ruthie's dad worked at the bank. He told my parents that our name was on a list of people who were behind on their mortgage payments. If we couldn't catch up on the payments, the bank would take our house and we would be evicted. I couldn't believe it. Ruthie's dad would hold off the bank until after the holidays, but we should borrow the money from someone if we could in the meantime. Mother went to go see Uncle Hendrik after dinner to ask him for the money, but of course he said no. When Mother came back and came upstairs to kiss me goodnight, I knew he had said no by the tired look on her face. Mother was surprised that I knew she had gone to see him since she hadn't told me she was. She felt bad that I knew about the eviction, but she also said that if we were evicted, Uncle Hendrik wanted us to move in with him. I was shocked, but also determined to help find a way to make money. Mother told me that Uncle Hendrik wasn't feeling well and that he wanted her to come back the next day and every day until he felt better, but she was too busy, so she asked me if I would do it. I wasn't looking forward to helping Uncle Hendrik or take his mean Scotty dog Inky for walks, but it was my chance to help, and I took it. Mother thanked me and said she would give me the nickel Uncle Hendrik gave her for the streetcar tomorrow, but I missed the streetcar and had to run to his house because he was a stickler for time. I made it in time, and he let me keep the nickel he gave Mother for the streetcar. But my day with him and Inky was no picnic. He bossed me around all afternoon. When it was time to go home, he gave me 2 nickels for the streetcar. I decided to use the nickels to go towards paying for our electric bill. It would be my Christmas surprise for Mother. When I got home, Ruthie was waiting for me. She had a big white box with her. Inside the box was her red Christmas dress from last year. Her mother had fixed it to fit me, but instead of being happy with it, I was humiliated. I thought that Ruthie now saw me as a poor, pitiful beggar girl. Inside the pocket of my dress were 4 tickets to the ballet. Along with an invitation to a fancy tea after the ballet. My pride was very offended. I gave my dress, tickets, and invitation back to Ruthie and told her that Mother and I would be ashamed to let her mother pay for everything for us. That started a fight between me and Ruthie, with Ruthie saying I should be ashamed of myself for being so selfish and thinking only of myself. I told her that she didn't know anything that was real, always lost in the world of fairy tales. The fight ended with us not being friends anymore. When Ruthie left, I ran upstairs to my attic room and cried. Afterwards, I went downstairs to help Mother scrub the kitchen floor. I told her about the fight me and Ruthie had, and Mother said our lives were very different now. Things that were possible for Ruthie were not possible for me. I admitted I was jealous of Ruthie, and Mother, to my surprise, said that Ruthie was jealous of me. Mother had the impression that Ruthie envied me because I had the boarders around, and Ruthie just had her mother and dad at her house. I hadn't thought about that. I couldn't call Ruthie to apologize since our telephone had been turned off because we couldn't pay the phone bill anymore. Mother believed I would be able to patch things up with Ruthie the next day at school, but Ruthie ignored me. And after 3 days of getting the cold shoulder, I knew Ruthie had meant it when she said we couldn't be friends anymore, and I gave up. I visited Uncle Hendrik every day during Christmas vacation. He would give me errands to do on my way home. One day, when he wanted me to take his shoes to be polished at the shoe shine shop, I saw a sign on the door that said they were out of business and they would be closed until the Depression was out of business. So I took the shoes home and polished them myself. When Uncle Hendrik found out I had polished the shoes, he let me keep the dime he had given me to pay for the shoe shining. I asked Uncle Hendrik if I could work for him, and he said I could keep any money I earned as long as it was done to his satisfaction. After that, I did Uncle Hendrik's chores for him. One day, while Uncle Hendrik was taking a nap, I found Sterling's sketch pad in my book bag. I looked at the pictures in it and began to write a story about a princess named Ruthie. By Christmas Eve, I had raised $2.40, enough to pay the electric bill. When I was done at Uncle Hendrik's for the day, I started heading home, but it was too slippery outside, and I kept slipping and falling. I fought my way back to Uncle Hendrik's house and asked if I could wait with him until the sleet stopped. He told me I would have to spend the night. Since our phone wasn't connected anymore, I had to call Ruthie and ask her if she would tell my family I was spending the night at his house. Ruthie agreed. The next morning I heard bells ringing outside the window. I looked out the window and saw Ruthie and her dad jingling bells. I ran outside to Ruthie and thanked her for rescuing me. She said, "That's what friends are for." We were friends again. I was so happy. When we got to my house, I saw that Dad had fixed my typewriter for me, and Charlie gave me a box of typing paper. Mother gave me the little Scotty dog pin that's on my dress. While Mother and I made the waffles for our Christmas dinner, I gave her the $2.40. Mother was so surprised and happy. When Ruthie's dad came back to my house to take Uncle Hendrik and Inky home, I watched Ruthie home and asked if she would like to go window shopping tomorrow, and she said yes. I even asked if I could borrow her red dress, and that made her happy. I then gave Ruthie the princess story I had written for her, and she loved it. Then she took out a Christmas present for me, and inside was my Amelia Earhart doll. I just love her. I thanked Ruthie and wished her a Merry Christmas. When I saw my house, I saw the lights on our Christmas tree through the window. Our tree was so beautiful. After Christmas, a miracle happened. My dad's Aunt Millie sent us money. It was just enough to pay the bank. We were saved. Winter melted into spring, and soon it was April. One morning, while I was typing a newspaper about our new boarders, Mr. and Mrs. Bell, a big gust of wind from the attic windows swooped up all the papers on my desk and sent them flying everywhere. After me, Ruthie and Sterling collected them. Sterling saw a picture I had cut out of a magazine. It was a picture of a birthday party for a movie star's child, a Robin Hood themed birthday party. My birthday was coming up in May, and I didn't want my parents to know I wanted a birthday party like that. I knew they couldn't afford it. Sterling said it was okay to want something, even when it seemed impossible, and Ruthie said hope is always good. Every Saturday, I had to take the sheets off all the beds, wash them, then put new clean sheets on all the beds. After I had gathered up all the sheets and pillowcases, the doorbell rang. who was at the door? Aunt Millie. I was so happy to see her. I dropped the sheets and pillowcases and hugged her. It was a big surprise to see her, since she never came to Cincinnati. Aunt Millie lived in Mountain Hollow, Kentucky. She was the town school teacher. Aunt Millie picked up half the pile of sheets and pillowcases I had dropped, and we went downstairs to the laundry tubs in the basement to start cleaning them. After they started soaking, Aunt Millie and I went outside. I called out to Mother and Dad, who were cleaning out the garage, to come see our surprise. They were both very surprised to see her. Dad asked how everybody was back in Mountain Hollow. We learned that the school she taught at had closed, and since her job went with her house, she lost her home too. We felt bad for her, but a friend of Aunt Millie's had been after her for a long time to live with her, so she was going to do that. But first, she wanted to see how we were doing. I offered to share my attic room with Aunt Millie, and she accepted. Early the next morning, Aunt Millie and I picked dandelion greens from the lawn to make a salad. The greens actually tasted good. That afternoon, me, Aunt Millie, Dad, and Charlie started making a vegetable garden. During Aunt Millie's visit, she showed me, Ruthie, and Sterling so many resourceful things that we put all the things she taught us in a book we called Aunt Millie's Waste Not, Want Not Almanac. We divided it into 4 different sections: growing, sewing, cooking, and miscellaneous savings. One day, as I was cleaning the bathtub, Sterling told me we were going to have to add a new section to the almanac. Aunt Millie had gotten chickens for us. She swapped apple pies for them, and Sterling and I would be selling their eggs to make money. Chickens was the new section for the almanac. I enjoyed feeding them. On me and Sterling's first egg selling day, Mother had a garden club meeting for the first time in a long time. Aunt Millie had gotten everything ready for the meeting, and it looked perfect. After Sterling and I had finished selling the eggs and were walking home, I saw a dog on the sidewalk. The dog had been abandoned by her owner, who couldn't feed her anymore. We brought the dog home. Aunt Millie told us to keep the dog in the garage while the garden club ladies were having their meeting. But as we brought her to the garage, the chickens came out of their coop, clucking away. And when the dog heard the chickens, she took off towards them. The dog chased the chickens onto the terrace where the ladies were. I took a flying leap and tackled the dog. As I did, I jostled the table. The candle holder fell off the table and shattered. The ladies quickly left. Mother told me the party had been the party to end all parties. I showed Aunt Millie the picture of the movie star child's Robin Hood birthday party. I told her I was stupid to hope for a birthday party that year, but Aunt Millie agreed with what Ruthie and Sterling said about hoping for something. Aunt Millie also believed I should name my dog Grace, so I did. Say hi, Grace. Woof woof. I learned that Grace was only trying to express how happy she was to meet the chickens when she ran to them, and to our surprise, she became their best friend. She spent most of her day outside with them. The day before my birthday, it was super warm outside. I couldn't even wear one of my spring dresses because my spring dresses from last year were too small. I had to wear my winter clothes to school. That afternoon, Aunt Millie showed up unexpectedly and invited my whole class to a penny pincher birthday party for me after school tomorrow. When Aunt Millie said she would show everyone how to make underwear out of a flour sack, the kids laughed out loud. I was mortified. I led Aunt Millie to the front door of the school, and she asked me if I liked the idea of the penny pincher party. I said no. I hated it. It was embarrassing, and I wished she had never come. Aunt Millie sadly left. I cried when I got home from school. When I raised my head so that the breeze could cool my face, I saw that Aunt Millie had made a dress for me out of a chicken feed sack. I put the dress on and wished I hadn't spoken to Aunt Millie the way I had. I learned from Mother and Dad that Aunt Millie was heading home. I told them what happened at school, and we rushed to the train station. I apologized to Aunt Millie and showed her the almanac me, Ruthie, and Sterling had made. That was enough to bring Aunt Millie back to my house and still have my penny pincher party. The party was a lot of fun. We learned to square dance, learned how to sing My Darling Clementine, took rides on the ragman's horse, cooked hot dogs, made flower crowns and necklaces, and ate delicious cake. Sterling, Ruthie, and I decided to add another section to the almanac, how to have a very happy birthday. Spring turned into summer. In June, Charlie went to Montana to work for the Civilian Conservation Corps, or CCC for short. It was a new program started by Franklin Roosevelt to help men who were out of work because of the Depression. He fixed roads and built parks and a stone wall. 2 months after Charlie left, Sterling and I were picking tomatoes in the vegetable garden to make preserves when I heard Grace barking a friendly bark. I looked up and saw a young hobo standing there. His name was Will Shepherd, and he was from Texas. He helped us pick the tomatoes, then joined me and my family for lunch. As we ate, Will told how he and his family had a beautiful farm, but their wheat crops failed them and his family had to leave. Will didn't go with them because he knew his family couldn't feed him anymore, so he decided to strike out on his own. He was on his way west to Oregon for the apple harvest. When Will finished eating, he started to leave, but Dad said we would be glad to have his help tomorrow too, and Aunt Millie even offered to give him a haircut. I was glad that Will said yes. After dinner, he taught us how to dance the Texas two-step, which I liked. The next day, as Aunt Millie gave Will his haircut, he talked about the hobo jungle he lived in. He lived in one near the train station. I asked Will how he knew we would be friendly towards him. Will said it was because he saw the sign. Sterling and I didn't know what he meant, so he showed us. We saw that someone had drawn a sketch of a cat on our fence post. The cat sign meant that a kind-hearted woman lived in our house. Turns out there were lots of other hobo signs. It was a secret code that hobos used to help each other. Will showed us other hobo signs. After Will left that afternoon, I realized that we didn't give him any food for the hobo stew he and the other hobos ate in their jungle. Sterling was doubtful about bringing food to the jungle, but I was able to convince him. We went to the jungle that afternoon. We brought fresh and canned tomatoes, beans, and a can of milk. When we got to the jungle, I saw that it wasn't as comfortable looking as I had imagined it would be. Will was glad we had brought food for the hobo stew. He put the tomatoes and beans inside and gave me a taste of it. It was very spicy. A woman came over and filled 3 bowls with the stew. Will gave her the can of milk. I was sadly surprised that the woman was bringing the stew to her own children. They were very small. One of them was a baby. I hadn't expected to see little kids in the jungle. The hobos were in desperate need of new shoes, too. When a group of men suddenly showed up, a boy named Lex was with them. He made fun of Will's accent when he said his name. I could tell Will didn't like him. Lex told me and Sterling he would show us how to hop a freight train. Will told him to leave us alone, but he wouldn't listen. He said there was nothing to it, and that the train we hopped would be heading towards our home. I said I wanted to hop the freight train. Will tried to tell me it was dangerous and against the law, but I didn't listen. Sterling said he had to come with me, and we walked to the train. When it started moving, Lex jumped into the boxcar like nothing. Will tossed Sterling into the train, then he hopped in and helped me into the boxcar. I was exhilarated. I felt so free. But then Sterling told me that Lex had led us to the wrong train, and I saw he was right. We were heading away from home instead of towards it. The train came to a sudden stop, and Lex quickly jumped out of the boxcar and took off. Lots of men came towards the train. I asked Will what was happening, and he told me the train had been stopped by railroad bulls. They were men the railroad hired to throw hobos off the trains. Will gave me his hat to put on and said he didn't want them to know I was a girl. I started to ask him why, but then a railroad bull shone a bright light into my eyes and ordered the three of us out of the boxcar. Sterling and I were jerked out by one of the railroad bulls. I asked Will where the bulls were taking us, and he said we were going to jail. I didn't see any reason for it, but Will said again that hopping freights was against the law. He tried to warn me, but I didn't listen. There was no way of escape. We were locked up in a cell. After dinner, I tried to let the sheriff allow me to call Uncle Hendrik, but since I didn't have any money for the call, he wouldn't let me. He took Will's hat off my head and realized I was a girl. He was going to put me in a separate cell. I struggled against him, but he was too strong for me. Just before I went in the door, Sterling showed me a hobo sign, the letter V, the hobo sign for pretend to be sick. I pretended I had to go to the bathroom and the sheriff let me. I saw a window I could climb out of, and I did. After I got outside, men saw me escaping and chased me. But don't worry, I was able to outrun them. When I got to the railroad tracks, I realized I would have to cross them by walking on the catwalk boards, which were slippery with oil. When I was halfway across, I heard a train coming towards me. I laid down flat on the boards and the train whooshed past, just a few feet away from me. When at last I got back up, I was able to cross the rest of the bridge. I kept on running towards home. When I finally got home, I told Dad, Mother, Aunt Millie, and Mrs. Howard what had happened. Dad and I took Mr. and Mrs. Bell's car to the jail. The sheriff let them go. When the sheriff saw me, he told me I should be ashamed of myself, but I told him I thought he should be ashamed of himself for arresting the hobos since they hadn't done anything wrong. After we got back in the car, Will told us he wouldn't be coming home with us. It was time for him to head to Oregon. He thought Montana was on the way, so he would be able to say hi to Charlie for me. Will thanked Dad for everything and said goodbye to me and Sterling. When me and Sterling got home, we took a bath, and Aunt Millie gave us buttered toast and milk. Dad told us that he, Mother, Mrs. Howard, and Aunt Millie needed to trust us to be more sensible in the future, and we nodded our heads to say we understood. In bed that night, I thought about the hobos. and believes that people should see the hard life they lived, so hopefully they would do something about it. Time passed. Charlie came home from Montana, and one day Dad finally announced he had found a job. Although it was a short-term, part-time, low-paying job at the airport, Dad was glad to be working again. He cleared land and built stone walls. Soon it was winter time again, and one day, when me, Sterling, and Ruthie got home from school, Mother gave me a brand new winter coat. I was in awe, but I hesitated, thinking it cost a lot of money. But turns out Mrs. Howard and Mother had taken apart one of Dad's old coats, washed the material, cut it to size, and made a new coat with the material inside out. I thought that was clever of them. Then Miss Finney and Ruthie presented me with a new hat and mittens that they had made for me out of an old sweater of Sterling's, and a hat of Charlie's that Grace chewed. I put my new winter gear on, and I felt warm and cozy. My old winter coat had been too small for me for 2 years. When Mother said she didn't think she was going to make something out of that, I asked if I could bring my old winter coats to the hobo jungle to give to a little girl. Mother said that was a very great idea. Ruthie and Sterling were allowed to go with me, but when we got to the hobo jungle, it was deserted. There was nothing and no one there. We headed off to the soup kitchen to find a little girl there who needed my coat. There was an endless amount of people coming in. The coats the hobo children were wearing were terrible, and their shoes were even worse. Ruthie found a little girl who needed my coat, and I generously gave it to her. The little girl was happy from head to toe. After dinner, as we all did the dishes, Ruthie's dad showed up unexpectedly and told us they had had a call for us on their telephone. Ruthie and her family took our phone calls for us since we couldn't afford our phone bill. The call was from Cincinnati Hospital. Apparently, Uncle Hendrik had had a fall and broken his ankle and wrist. They'd patched him up, but he was making quite a ruckus and wanted my parents to bring him to my house. This news did not make me happy one bit. Before school, I had to bring Uncle Hendrik his breakfast tray and newspaper and walk his dog, Inky. Charlie helped out while I was at school, but when I was home they were my responsibility, and they were a big one. Each day, Uncle Hendrik gave me a big to-do list. Almost every day I had to write a letter for him since he had broken his writing hand. Usually it was a letter to the newspaper about Franklin Roosevelt. Uncle Hendrik didn't like him or his wife Eleanor and thought that everything that was wrong with the country was their fault. After I wrote the letter, he signed it and ordered me to deliver it to the newspaper offices immediately. So I did. One letter I had to write for Uncle Hendrik was about his disapproval about an empty hospital potentially being used as a home to house, feed, and clothe hobos. I personally thought that was a great idea. After I wrote the letter, I went upstairs to my room and decided to write my very own letter to the newspaper about why it would be a good idea to use the hospital for hobos. I also wrote in my letter that people should bring donations of coats and shoes to soup kitchens and missions. After I typed my letter, Ruthie and Sterling arrived. Ruthie was going to the soup kitchen with some shoes and coats of her own to donate. When we got there, I came up with an idea: to take pictures of the hobo children with my camera, showing how bad their coats and shoes were. I put the film in the envelope with my letter, and when we got to the newspaper offices, I put the letters in the inbox. The next morning, before we ate breakfast, we heard Uncle Hendrik yell very loudly. He exploded out of his room and slapped the newspaper on the table and asked me what I had done. I realized my letter and pictures had been printed in the newspaper. Everyone was surprised when they realized what I had done. Dad read my letter aloud, and Mother said she was proud of me. Uncle Hendrik was speechless when he found out he had given me the idea to write my letter. Everyone congratulated me and Sterling. I was glad people would be reading my letter and seeing the pictures of the children. The following week, me, Ruthie, and Sterling went back to the soup kitchen with more coat and shoe donations from my classmates at school. We brought our donations to the director of the soup kitchen, who was grateful towards us for taking the pictures of the children, and grateful towards me for writing the letter. They had had many more donations since my letter appeared in the newspaper. I had to deliver another letter from Uncle Hendrik to the newspaper offices again that day. Mr. Gibb, the unfriendly newspaper editor, told me that any time I had something else I wanted to write, to bring it to him. He said I had the makings of a good reporter. His words made me feel so happy, and I thanked him. Well, that concludes my story. I hope you all enjoyed it. See ya! This story was taken from the American Girl books about Kit Kittredge.